Welcome back. Now, a report commissioned by the Shoprite Group has revealed the critical need for targeted support for female entrepreneurs and improved access to resources in underrepresented regions of South Africa's small, medium and micro enterprise sector. Worldwide Worx says for SMEs to contribute meaningfully to South Africa's economy, they need more than just recognition. CEO Arthur Goldstuck and Modise, Enterprise and Government Relations Executive at Shoprite, join us now to look into how South Africa can unlock the full potential of its SME sector and in turn create a more inclusive and resilient economy. Thank you so much for your time, lady and gent. Arthur, I want to start off with you, looking at what was critical for you to capture in the survey, really to absorb the full narrative and dynamics of the SME sector in South Africa.
The real quest for us was to find out what are the factors that are holding back SMEs, and also within the demographics of SMEs, in other words, gender, age of the business, those kind of questions. Which of those have an impact and how do they have an impact? And if there are challenges for small, medium and micro enterprises, how do we address those challenges? Those are all questions that have been asked for a long time. And we've surveyed those kind of issues in the past, but they change all the time. The dynamics of the market change all the time. So we felt it was a critical question to understand what is holding back SMMEs and what can enable them to grow.
And Maude, why was it important, particularly for Shoprite, to commission this report?
I think you really mentioned it in your introduction before, where we said SMMEs are quite critical in our job creation space within the economy. Looking at where our unemployment rate is as a country, we really need to look at areas where we can actually focus and create more jobs. But over and above that, looking into how do we assist SMMEs to actually contribute to the economy significantly. So for us, it was really around that, and looking at the survey that we had commissioned now with the 800 SMMEs, looking at the various factors that Arthur has spoken into, we have then come to the realization that female entrepreneurs are obviously have a certain critical need that we need to focus on in terms of supporting them and making sure that they are at a level and they are at a point where they can also thrive within the SMME landscape.
I mean, we know the very important contribution that the SME sector has for the broader economic landscape of South Africa. But Arthur, let's talk about the resilience there in a tough economic environment. Has that, do we have evidence of resilience of the SME sector, even within all the headwinds of the economy that we face right now?
Very much so. It always startles us to see how resilient the small business really is. And what we've found is that mid-sized businesses reflect a massive level of profitability, with 43% of them, that's not far below half, achieving net margins of more than 20%, which is really significant, not just for the health of SMMEs, but also for their key role in job creation.
Well, actually, Maude, how dependent is big business on small businesses in their value chains?
So within the Shoprite space, I do believe that we look for SMMEs for innovation. That's where the new products and the testing of products comes through. That's where you'll actually find a lot more open-minded thinking within the SMME landscape. But then also looking at Shoprite as a whole and the work that we're trying to do to integrate SMMEs within retail. A few years ago, we developed a business unit called Shoprite Next Capital to actually get SMMEs to thrive within the retail space. And that was really looking at, within retail, what are the benchmarks and the hoops and troops that SMMEs need to jump through in order for them to be integrated. And we then came up with a plan that devises how easily that we can make that process for them, to actually listen to their demands, handhold them, support them with working capital, packaging and labeling solutions, marketing support. So I think for us, from our perspective, looking at the total landscape and how business actually or big business relies on small business. It is really around innovation and making sure the responsibility is upon us as big business to actually make sure that they thrive within those ecosystem, and we provide ways and guardrails for them to obviously operate efficiently in our markets.
Well, we are going to drill into those hoops that small businesses have to jump over to really thrive. And with that, I mean, that is also linked to the kind of diversity mix that we're seeing within that SME sector. So, Arthur, from what you gathered in the report, what does that diversity mix look like?
The most interesting thing is the gender balance of SMME ownership and who is most likely to own a small business. And what's very encouraging is that when you look at the micro enterprise, more than half are owned or run by women, 51%, which is really significant when you consider the stereotype that it's men who go out there and start up businesses. But then the sad aspect of that is that it drops rapidly as the company becomes bigger, to the extent that when you get to the medium-sized enterprise, in other words, companies that are 51 to 200 employees, you find that the ownership or management by women drops to below 20%. And that's a startling drop, because it just shows you the extent to which men dominate management, or at least the ability to start up larger SMEs. And it drops steadily through the company sizes. So when you get to the companies with 6 to 10 employees, it's already dropped to 38%. And then when you go to 21 to 50, which is the slightly larger of the small enterprises, it's dropped to 26%. So you can see that rapid fall off. And what that tells you, among many other things, is that women do not have enough support in moving up the ranks, but also in scaling up their businesses.
We're going to get to those shortly, but Maude, I want to come to you. This diversity mix, is that what you are seeing on the ground? Yeah.
Surely, definitely. And there's a lot of things that we're doing internally to obviously make sure that we also play our part within the SMME landscape. I mean, over the past year, the past financial year, if I can recall properly, we increased our procurement with African women-owned suppliers by 9%.
Yeah.
Because we are exactly focusing on that. I think that procurement number is now up to 18.3 billion from an organization that procures a various amount of goods. So it is what we are seeing on the ground. And obviously within us as a corporate and many other corporates, it's something that should give us a challenge to say, how do we sort out such issues, and how do we actively go and find solutions that target women-owned businesses?
And this is quite interesting, because I mean, we're not just talking about the broader economic sector here. We're really honing in on manufacturing and the retail sector as well. Arthur, why is it that women still face greater barriers to scale? You talk about the fact that as companies get bigger, that diversity mix kind of shrinks and narrows. What are those barriers, and do they lend themselves to each other?
The biggest barriers are access to funding, as well as access to markets. And those do lend themselves to each other, or they combine, because if you don't have the funding to go to market, you can't access markets, because marketing is often seen as a luxury. For example, the ability to get out there and sell requires a team, and all of that requires resources. And if you don't have funding, you're just surviving from day to day. You can't get out there and access networks, access markets, and market yourself in effect. And you see that also in the extent of competitiveness of SMMEs, for example. So the startups, you'll find that a fairly high proportion regard themselves as highly competitive, or it looks like a high proportion. It's 53% of companies that are between 1 and 5 years old, or from 1 to 5 years old. In other words, startups are highly competitive. But when you get to the really mature companies, those that are 20 years old or more, it leaps to 69% more than 2/3 of mature companies are competitive compared to the SMMEs. And that is partly a factor of the time it takes to scale up your business and to become highly profitable and highly competitive. But it's possible to give startups the tools, the resources, access to markets that make them highly competitive within a year or two. But we're not seeing that happening to a large proportion of the small businesses.
Well, more talk to me then, I mean, because there are different tools here that can be used by SMEs and big business to really get small businesses through these barriers. Arthur talks about access to funding, access to markets. I can imagine that Shoprite is quite pivotal in that access to markets. But in terms of funding, I'm not exactly sure how. So just talk to me about the different tools that you are using to help SMEs get through these barriers.
So within the Shoprite space, we look into various factors into how do we assist SMMEs with working capital. So all the SMMEs within our ESD program then get paid earlier within 7 days, and they get to turn cash in their businesses a bit quicker, so that they're able to use it to produce more orders or whatever it is that they need to. But then within the broader Shoprite context as well, we've got a business division called CredX that really focuses even over and above the SMME landscape, looking at bigger businesses as well, is really how do you assist them with working capital assistance. And they've disbursed about 10 billion Rand worth of working capital assistance in the previous financial year to 110 suppliers. So in that space, it's really looking at how do we actively and intentionally help businesses, small, medium, and large, that are within our operating environment. Like you said, the operating environment is quite difficult at this point in time. And how do you create solutions in order for you to still make sure that you get your supply, you still make sure that your supplies are still intact in terms of cash flow, from a cash flow perspective.
Well, the different regions of the country are not homogenous. We know, for example, that Johannesburg is the economic hub of the country. Arthur, talk to me about the geographic disparities in the SME space.
Yes, very much so, because when you look at the proportion of small businesses that are located in the major economic centers, that tells you also that there's disproportionate power from being in those areas. So, for example, 34.6% of SMMEs in our survey are based in Gauteng. Western Cape not too far behind, 31.3%, but then it drops off dramatically to 15.1% in KZN, and the rest even further behind. The Eastern Cape, with a high proportion of the population, has 7.4% of these businesses. And that means that they have less economic clout as well, because where you have more concentration of businesses, clearly you have more concentration of buying and selling power. And therefore, it's more expensive to buy things in those areas, but also more expensive to sell things in terms of the logistics, in terms of the margins that you have to add and the like. And that creates a further barrier to the market for you. So the areas with the lowest proportion of SMEs, like Northern Cape with 1.1% and Northwest 1.8%, clearly the small businesses based there are at a massive disadvantage and need massive support.
Well, a company that is not concentrated is Shoprite. We know that it has an incredibly wide presence in South Africa. So, Maude, is the inclusion of SMEs something that Shoprite struggles with in the smaller provinces?
So I think like Arthur mentioned, 65% of the SMMEs or businesses that are forming part of this SMME landscape are between Gauteng and Western Cape. And those are more the businesses that we're seeing coming through. Trying to apply on our portal. We always talk about where are the other businesses, where can we tap into other opportunities. So we do make sure that we obviously onboard other businesses that are from all the other regions. And that is what we're seeing on the ground in terms of participation in SMMEs needing access to markets. You'll find a huge load of them within the Gauteng and the Western Cape divisions.
Yeah. Well, as we close off this conversation, I mean, just looking at what we can do to help the sector thrive, Arthur, who should we look to carry the responsibility of unlocking this potential of SMEs? I mean, in what capacity should government and the private sector come in?
Well, as Maude has indicated, Shoprite itself is heavily engaged in trying to support this sector, and we should expect that kind of support from other large organizations as well. In other words, the big retailers are, and the big wholesalers for that matter, are in the best situation to support the SMMEs simply by enabling the supply chain to allow those businesses to be part of the logistics of moving goods and products from their environments into the big retail stores. But then at the same time, financial services institutions could provide greater funding, access to funding, could promote market access for those startups, for example. And then in terms of mid-size enterprises, there's the ability to create more collaboration through making it easier for them to work together. And that's where government can come to the party in terms of reducing red tape, limiting the restrictions that place on businesses to work together on the one hand, but also to access markets on the other hand.
And I mean, in those smaller provinces, we also know that the lack of infrastructure also lends itself to SMEs not really coming to the fore and not scaling. Shoprite is a highly cash generative business, Maude, with a lot of room to expand on capital expenditure. Are there certain things that are being worked on for Shoprite to maybe help in infrastructure investments so that small businesses can have a more fertile environment to thrive and to scale?
So I do believe, Zinati, in terms of that question, there's a lot of ecosystem players that are in this SMME landscape. And for us to thrive and for us to make an impactful difference, we need to work together. Whether it's us in corporate making sure that the access to market and the businesses are thriving, but also there is room for another role player to obviously look into where business or how, what is it to start a business? What does it mean? What are the responsibilities? So there's a lot of, I don't think it's solely placed on one role player to make all the difference. And that's not what we're saying with the report. The report is really around how can all the ecosystem players come together and make an impactful difference within this economy of SMMEs. Because once they thrive, we'll all be able to obviously derive the economic benefits from it and create jobs from a broader economic perspective.
And indeed, you are correct. We do need all hands on deck. Thank you so much for your time and for your insights there, Maude and Arthur, on this very, very important topic. That was Maude Modise, Enterprise and Government Relations Executive at Shoprite, and Arthur Goldstuck, CEO of Worldwide Worx, unpacking the state of the SMME report.